Hasan, welcome.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Hasan, is there anything you would like to say as a way of reflection on Emir's part of the story, or shall I start straight away with my questions to you?
Do you need to introduce the background for those who may not know? Or
yeah, this is what I'm asking, Hasan.
Yeah.
Hasan?
Well, a reflection is that, you know, Emir has really given us a good, long story that there is not much that I can add to his story, at least for those aspects that he had already talked about. Yeah.
Good. This is a good tradition in our master classes, that we really want to make it as interactive as possible, so that. So my first question to you: what was the first time you have heard the name of Geoffrey Nice? Do you remember the moment that you said, "Who is this British?"
I think. I'm not sure, but I think it was during Milosevic's trial. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I mean, yes. Listen, the name of Geoffrey Nice, even Milosevic's trial itself at that time, you know, did not, to me personally, you know, on a personal level, it did not mean as much as somebody may have expected it. Not at that moment. I was so deeply involved with some, you know, issues, problems that affected me personally and the people around me, and Bosniaks as community, you know, that were subjected to genocide. That, yes, I followed the process, but, you know, it was 2,000 kilometers away from me. I was in Bosnia, it was in The Hague. And also I thought that Milosevic's trial was in a good hands, not only because of Geoffrey Nice, but also because I believe that the tribunal had the capacity, the means, the political backing, whatever was necessary to bring this to a successful, you know, completion. Mm-hmm. You know, I mean, nobody expected that Milosevic was going to die while being on trial. Mm-hmm. And yeah, so after that, some things looked different. And then I also realized that, you know, Serbia was going to play some really nasty games at the international scene, trying to get away with its own involvement in the Bosnian War and Croatian War and Kosovo War.
So Geoffrey Nice's name is for you equivalent with Milosevic, Slobodan Milosevic trial and with the ICTY. Do you remember when you met me for the first time?
Yes, it was.
Where was it?
It was. I had a book launch. I had a book promotion. It was self-published book. I mean, I printed it with some sponsors here in Bosnia and brought a few copies to Amsterdam, and I gave a lecture at some place in Amsterdam. And
it's called the Bali.
Yeah.
Political Cafe, the Bali. Yes.
And you know, not every time, but most of the time when I sit there at the, you know, when I'm given the floor to speak, I look at the audience, and when I count the number of the people sitting in the audience, not every time, but most of the time, it's an indication how much that problem is actually, you know, interesting to the people I'm supposed to address. And I was supposed to talk to the Bosniak community in the Netherlands, Bosniak community, or even Bosnian community, and of course also the Dutch. And there were like 10, 15 people, 20 people maximum, and you were there, and I realized you were very much familiar with the problem, and you were actually much more informed and interested in the subject than most of the people in the audience.
So thank you for these compliments. I did not ask this question for fishing as a compliment, but because the event by itself is so important, and I want to bring you back to this important event. Do you remember the year when it was? When was it? Before?
I can't remember the year. I published the book probably sometime in 2002, so it might have been maybe 2004. I'm not sure.
I think it was 6. I think it was after the death of Milosevic.
Okay.
And this is important for our story. So Geoffrey is associated with a trial for individual criminal responsibility on the genocide. But what I remember very much, one of the speakers at your book launch was Elizabeth Zechweld. Yeah. Why was she important, and what does she represent in your life?
Yeah.
Who is she, why we were there, and why is this important in your life?
I mean, the first time I visited Netherlands was in February '97. It was when a Dutch TV house called VPRO wanted to make a documentary on this story, involvement of the Dutch in the case of Srebrenica, July '95, and the aftermath. And so after that, I came to the Netherlands a number of times, and the only thing I wanted from the Dutch authorities was to confirm that, yes, this is what happened, and we are going to do something about it. The only thing I asked the Dutch authorities was to search for the missing persons, and in particular, I had the list of 239 people, men and boys, whose names were placed on a list on 12 July '95 while they were still inside the UN base, the Dutch battalion compound. The list had been missing for several months. I managed to find it through some organizations, and that was a very concrete evidence, a trace that these people actually existed, and that they actually existed inside the UN Dutch battalion compound. Without it, the denial of genocide, of facts of July '95 is not something we could only attribute to the so-called Serb side or Serbian side. The denial came from the Netherlands as well. It has been there all the time, and to some extent, it is still there in the Netherlands. The denial and full recognition of what really happened at Potocari, for example, in '95. So at one point,
just pause here for a moment. So you came to Netherlands. You found this extremely important document of who were civilians who found a refuge in Dutch-backed UN compound in Potocari, and this list was important investigation moment because none of these people were living anymore.
Yeah, they have been missing. They have been missing. Yeah, and
how did Elizabeth came into this picture, and who is she?
It was in 2002 when I appeared in one of these Dutch TV talk shows in the Dutch TV, and I talked about the list. I talked about the Dutch responsibility, and Lisbeth herself actually approached me through an organization in the Netherlands that had been helping me all this time. It would have been impossible for me to really do much without their help. It has been there. Yes, they changed their name 3 times. Initially, it was IKV, and then IKV Pax Christi. Now they are called Pax, P-A-X only. And they're still there, and they still offer their support for this, what I called it at the time, campaign for truth and justice. And these were the key words that I came up with together with a number of mothers, women in Tuzla and later Sarajevo, which determined our cause, what we really wanted to do. We wanted, truth and justice. And she approached me because she believed that, we should take the state of the Netherlands to the court. I never really wanted to take the state of the Netherlands to the court. One of the reasons why I decided to do it was that I actually realized that the Dutch politics, I was in their parliament, I spoke with their MPs, I spoke with several different ministers in their parliament, and I spoke to other officials in the Netherlands, and I realized that they are not going to acknowledge what happened. In addition to that, at these meetings, I think in a way they tried to disqualify me by saying that, not only in my face, but they wrote about it in their reports, etc. They referred to me as an emotional former Bosnian, interpreter from Srebrenica, who speaks with emotion.
Coming from Dutch, just pause here, coming from Dutch, they probably think that being emotional is not flattering word, while in the cultures we come from, it's a very flattering word.
This is what I understood. It was an attempt to disqualify me, and so what I said to these officials at one of these last meetings, I said, okay, listen, I will speak with no emotions in the future, no more emotions, no problem, just facts, and see you in the court. I told them, see you in the court.
And you saw them in the court, and how did it go?
I saw them in the court. It was really, it took several years before finally the Dutch court in The Hague, the district court, decided to take the case. Being lawyers, Geoffrey and whoever else is in the law business, you are all aware that you succeed, you make a huge leap forward once the court takes the case. So that was the first big obstacle I had with my lawyer, of course, that we had to deal with. So it took us, we spent several years in the courtroom without actually having the case. We had to convince the court at two different levels that it should have jurisdiction over this case. And it only decided to take the case, I think in 2005, something like that. And even then, my lawyer came up with some tricks. The aim of me and my lawyer was get to the story, to the facts, as we call it.
And Hasan, just pause here. So this case was taken up by this lawyer, Dutch lawyer, her name is Elizabeth Zechveld, but the case was not just about your two family members. It involved also another plaintiff, family Mustafić, whose father, the father Mustafić, was official electrician working in the compound where the Dutch bet was placed. So there was a case actually about the responsibility of Dutch state for the death of 3 people, 2 members of your family and 1 member of Mustafić family. Am I explaining it right?
Well, it's not. It's not even that simple, because initially, of course, I blamed the state of the Netherlands in my lawsuit for the deaths of my 3 family members. 3 family members, my parents and my brother, so it's 3. So in addition, there was this other case, the family that lived in the Netherlands, because their father husband, was also killed. He was the electrician working for Dutchbat. So they joined in, and it was only at the end, or somewhere towards the end of this legal process, that they excluded my mother as a victim. So what remained was the three men, you know, my father, brother, and this electrician. So my mother was in a judgment delivered by the appeals chamber in 2008 when I won the case. Actually, sorry, I first lost the case in 2008, and then I won the case in 2011. So the appeals chamber reversed the decision of the first instance court and declared the state of the Netherlands responsible. That was in 2011. And but the judgment excluded my mother from the case as a victim. They said
Why?
It's a bit complicated. They said like this.
It's fine. We'll move on. Yeah. So how did you feel about the justice process taking so long? What sort of energy and motivation one needs to have when one is suing a state for a loss of 3 family members?
When the judges, when the panel, the judges, the presiding judge, when they allowed me to speak, and I was allowed to speak at every stage of this case once for about half an hour, I think, or 20 minutes to present the case. I did not speak only about my family and the other person. I spoke about the situation in Potocari in general. I presented what happened in Potocari on 11, 12, and 13 July. So I was talking about thousands and thousands of Bosnian refugees and the Dutch battalion, United Nations being there, and what happened inside the base and around the base. So this was the case. This was what the case was about. But what happened before that and after that, including the presentation of the lawyers representing the state of the Netherlands, was a total denial. Okay, total denial. So the state of the Netherlands, officially, even in the courtroom, all the time, until the last moment of this legal process, until 2013, actually, they denied that anything that I actually described had happened in Potocari ever took place. They said it did not happen. A total denial. And I will give you an example. One of these officers, one of these commanding officers of the Dutch battalion, the deputy commander, Major Franken, was sitting in front of me in the courtroom in 2005. And I was allowed to ask questions. I mean, I had to sit there for days and for hours every day during these court proceedings, listening to the lies being presented by the lawyers representing the state of the Netherlands. It was not easy. It was really not easy to listen to all that. And so I stood up. The judge allowed me to ask the question, to pose the question to Major Franken. So I said like this. I really had to control my own feelings. I was looking at a man who 10 years before sent my family off the compound and handed them to the Serbs. It was that very person who was sitting in front of me in the courtroom. And so I asked him the question, Major Franken, did you on 13 July 1995 order the refugees who were on the compound to leave the compound, walk to the gate, and in this way basically walk into the hands of the Serbs who were waiting for them? And he said, no, I did not. He said, no, I did not. The judge intervened, so even the judge himself thought that this question was not acceptable. And this was the core of the case. My question and the answer from Franken is actually the core of the case. That's why I was there. And so the judge asked Major Franken Wait, but how did then the refugees leave the compound? This is what the judge asked him. And he said like this, they stood up and left. This is just one example. So, I was faced with a wall, not the wall of silence in this case anymore, but a wall of false information. And this false information was being, constructed, produced. I had the feeling by a team of people hired by the state of the Netherlands or some ministry within the government to create a narrative which the Dutch wanted the world to see. The narrative which I was presenting as an eyewitness was not acceptable to the state of the Netherlands. They just rejected any notion of it.
So Hasan, many of our young friends did not follow your case and what you did, but eventually Nuhanović, Mustafić versus the Netherlands is the case that you won.
Yeah, if we can use the word "won" in this context, this is what happens. I've been asked this question many times before, and I always say, okay, let's use the word "win," but winning the case, proving after how many years? 2013.
2013.
So it's like how many years,
after
the fact?
13. 18 something.
18 years. 18 years after the event. So 18 years after the event, proving to the world, to the court, to the Dutch community, that what I said, what we all say, is actually what happened. So it takes 18 years to do that.
So you think you proved the obvious, but also in the legal history of Srebrenica, the Netherlands will be the only state that was found responsible for loss of death in a genocidal process. Is it something that means something to you? That Netherlands as a state is now on a record responsible not to prevent, or that didn't prevent genocide of happening.
I mean, these are the consequences. These are the consequences, I can even, beyond my control. I mean, beyond really something that I wanted the truth to be recognized, And what happens after the court decision in terms of consequences is something beyond my control, and whatever happens, it's not my fault. I mean, you have the Netherlands with that kind of label, and you have Serbia with that kind of label. Serbia also has that kind of label as a state for not preventing and not punishing the crime of genocide, actually for breaching the convention. The only country in the world since 1948 with that kind of label, even though I think they are quite successful in making that invisible, other than to the people who are in the legal community and are aware of these cases. I think it remains quite invisible for the rest of the world. Both facts, the Netherlands and the Serbia's label for that crime.
Thank you. So we are going back a little to connect your presentation with Emir. At certain point, Emir was saying, I'm reading the stenographic notes of Republika Srpska Assembly, and many of these people who were politicians were saying outrageous things day in, day out. And many of these people who were then planning and conspiring to commit crimes together with Radovan Karadzic, who is eventually being found guilty of genocide and other crimes, are still beyond the reach of justice. They're still free people, and many often see them. So coming back to your family experience, you have given a recent interview for Bosnian newspapers where you see, I know who is responsible for death of my mother, and this person is still walking free. How does this affects all of you who struggle and with the emotional, personal, physical loss of dearest ones, and with you seeing the justice process being very symbolic and selective? How does it affect your struggle for the truth and for justice personally? Because you reached a lot, you achieved a lot, but there are still so many things that need to be taken care of. Can you tell us something about this story, that the person who is responsible for the death of your mother?
Yeah. I mean, listen, first of all, the journalists, many times it happens, the journalists really, I mean, they are the ones who decide about the title of some interview. I mean, the title was something to do with me, you know, knowing about the identity of the person who might have killed my mother. And of course, you know, for the journalists, they want this sort of, you know, sensational titles, and I didn't like it. I really didn't like it. I think the interview was actually about something else. He asked me other sort of questions, and I explained to him, you know, and of course, you and Geoffrey are very much aware of what I'm going to say now, that if you look at the hierarchy of, you know, the chain of command of the political and the military authorities of Republika Srpska at the time, it's a pyramid. It's a pyramid. And what I said in the interview was that the top of the pyramid was taken off. Karadzic, Mladic, and other top political and military figures have been tried by and sentenced by the ICTY. I mean, I don't know how many of them, maybe 10, 15 from the top, maybe less. And then what you have is this middle part of the pyramid, and you have the base of the pyramid. The base of the pyramid are the executioners themselves, those who pull the trigger. And they receive the orders from the top and they pull the trigger. They were, in most cases, ordinary people from the local villages and towns, you know, who committed these crimes. And they are still living in our neighborhood. And the numbers, maybe hundreds, maybe thousands, but they do not really have, you know, any political, you know, influence to dictate any sort of processes that are happening in our country. It is the middle part of the pyramid. This is what I wanted to emphasize also in the interview. It is the middle part of the pyramid that the tribunal, the ICTY, tried some of those from the middle part of the pyramid. The court of Bosnia and Herzegovina also tried some of these cases, but definitely not enough of these cases. And it is those people who, you know, in the hierarchical structure occupy the place in the middle of the pyramid, who still remain who still occupy influential, you know, political and other sort of positions in this country. And we are probably talking about dozens and even hundreds of people. And one of these individuals worked, and until 3 or 4 months ago, he was working in the center of Sarajevo as a high-ranking official of the Ministry of Security of Bosnia and Herzegovina. And that is actually what I meant when I said this thing during the interview. He was indicted about 3 or 4 months ago, and until 3 or 4 months ago, he has been sitting in his office at the center of Sarajevo, you know, in the city where I live, and even the Memorial Center has an office in that same building, and that is the office where I usually work as an employee of the Memorial Center. So basically, I went into the same building for the last 10 years, where a suspect, you know, possibly responsible for the murder of my mother, is also sitting in his office. This is the situation of Bosnia and Herzegovina 25 years after the war. And I think this is probably the best example for your students to understand what we have to cope with. What we have to cope with. You know, it is not, yes.
Hasan, I'm quite sure that they are going to address you on this particular issue, which Geoffrey raised with Emily as well. Is war actually ever over?
Yeah, listen, I mean, for the last couple of years, at least for the last couple of years, there's a continuous, you know, narrative in the public discourse, including the mainstream media, about the possibility of another war in Bosnia and Herzegovina and the region. This has been happening for the last couple of years in continuity, and it also happened in direct correlation with the statements made by the top political figure, the most influential political figure in Republika Srpska, Milorad Dodik. He never stops saying, including a couple of days ago, which he repeated, I think, he never stops saying that ultimately and eventually, you know, one day, sooner or later, Republika Srpska, which is half of our country, will be annexed to Serbia.
Fascinating. Thank you very much for this.
Yeah.
So if you do not mind, I will return to your lawsuit against the Dutch state. So for the students, it is important to realize that ICTY was dealing with retributive justice aimed at criminal responsibility of individuals. But what Hasan did in a lawsuit in this Nuhanović-Mustavić case against Dutch state was an example of restorative justice. You actually go to the institution and you ask for them not just to get a truthful judgment, what really happened and what is the loss and why it is a loss, but also for the state to be compelled to pay damages. So when you compare retributive and restorative justice process, because you were closely observing and genocide cases at ICTY and local courts, and in your case, do you think that you see these two approaches to such a huge losses of mass atrocities complementary, that they should exist and coexist? And how would you say, did the victims enough utilized and use possibilities of lawsuits and damages for their
absolutely
suffering?
Not. Absolutely not. My case is an exceptional case. And then maybe just a few years after I initiated my case, there was a very similar case initiated by the mothers of Srebrenica, the association gathering thousands of survivors. Many of them are mothers whose sons have been murdered. And so this case, I think it's still going on. I think it's not over yet, even though we had the Supreme Court ruling, I think 1 year ago. And even though the mothers have claimed that the state of the Netherlands was responsible for thousands of people, the Supreme Court ruling refers to 300 men and boys that the state of the Netherlands is partially responsible And then they came up with this really ridiculous, ridiculous ruling that the state of the Netherlands is 10% responsible in the amount of 10% for the deaths of those 300 men and boys who were inside the compound of the Dutch battalion on 13 July 1995. 10% responsible. People ask me to try and interpret what that actually means. I can only speculate. I think that means that the state of the judicial authorities of the Netherlands, the court itself, has actually, taken some steps in advance to reduce the amount of damages that the state of the Netherlands would be liable to pay to the families by defining the responsibility to 10%, which will be translated directly into the amount that the state of the Netherlands might have to pay.
Mm-hmm. And I understand that, but going back to this restorative justice processes at the University of Amsterdam and the Faculty of Law, there is now a foundation for reparations named after you, Hasan Nuhanovic.
Oh, so it's not after me. It's just Nuhanović Foundation.
Nuhanović.
Yeah, what happened actually before we finally had the final decision of the court, before we won the case, and we never knew until the last second, not minute, the last second, while the judge read, the court decision, the verdict. We never knew what was going to be read. We never knew if we are winning or losing this case. And so before this happened, several years before this happened, my lawyer, Elizabeth Zeffeld, she telephoned me one day and said that she has serious doubts about the outcome of the case. And she says, in case that we lose, I would like this case to be remembered, and that this case serves as a motivation to other people in other parts of the world who have gone through a similar experience, with the other regimes, the other governments, etc. So she suggested that the foundation be named after my family, not myself, but after my family. So yes, that's how it happened, and I gave her my consent. I signed the consent.
And I can see about the time, and we've got Edina to hear.
I know, but this
can I? Yeah.
Go ahead.
And I would certainly want the participants to be able to ask Hasan Nuhanovic some questions, but I want to give him an opportunity to link dissatisfaction with one process with dissatisfaction with another, if he wants to, because I think it's a very important thing for us to hear. And Hasan, may I just ask you this question? You've told us about what Major Franken did, and you know that we called Major Franken, by then Colonel Franken,
yes,
as a prosecution witness, and he was examined by me, then in part by another lawyer, and then cross-examined. Can you, and this was supposed to be, the resolution of issues by an international tribunal. How did you, because I expect you watched or subsequently watched the evidence, how did you feel about Franken's evidence given in that setting?
If I may just interrupt. Hello to everybody. I'm okay to wait. I mean, I've dedicated.
I'm just writing to you.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you, Edina.
I also
thank you so much.
Give to Hasan as much time as you want, so I'm not gonna.
Yeah.
Go.
Yeah. Geoffrey, I understand your question, and as I said, I've been following as much as I could. The process, the trials in The Hague, and I was very much, of course, interested in what Franken was saying in the courtroom. And I always felt that the OTP, the prosecutors, whoever, the judges, skipped certain questions that may have compromised the role of the Netherlands, the Dutch battalion, or these officers, including Franken himself. Yeah. I think these questions were deliberately designed in such a way as to not expose the Netherlands and the United Nations, actually. I think the court was more, this is my opinion, I think the court was much more concerned about exposing the United Nations and its role in the fall of Srebrenica, and especially in the situation in Potocari. So basically, the ICTY did not want to have the UN and the Netherlands on trial. It wanted to have the Bosnian Serb political and military figures sentenced. That was the primary goal, and I took that. I mean, I accepted that. I accepted that.
Well,
I was very frustrated. Yeah, I was very frustrated. I was very frustrated by what I recognized was happening. I was very frustrated, but I realized there was really not much I could do about it. And I said, okay, let's have the Bosnian Serb and political leaders prosecuted, and let's take as much as we can, you know, from Franken, from these UN officers, you know, as witnesses against these individuals. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. And I'll just finish with one comment, which is not in any way to challenge what you say, although I can explain probably the position differently. But the external, the real point for us all to understand is that one judicial process thought to be, or doing whatever it could by way of its best, can cause such distress through somebody who was a really involved person by reason of the way it presented one witness. And it's very important for us to recognize, especially as lawyers who feel that they are so much above things or outside things, to realize how much damage you can do simply by one witness. Sorry to intervene, Nena, but I wanted to make that point.
It's important.
Through Hasan.
And Hasan, if you could join us on Thursday, Andrew Cayley, who has been in investigation of the first ever team, together with Stephanie Fries and Richard Butler, he's going to give a lecture, and it will be very interesting to see how this whole investigation, ICTY investigation in Srebrenica crime.
I need to interrupt just like 10 seconds.
No problem.
Try to place yourself in my shoes. I have never ever been officially invited to enter the building of the ICTY. Never ever. Okay. I invited myself into the building several times. And what I asked the ICTY to do was to prosecute, if possible, to investigate the role of the officers of Dutch battalion, actually the United Nations. There was a chain of command, you know, from the Dutch battalion all the way through Tuzla, Sarajevo, Zagreb, and New York. So it was a chain of command with a number of people involved, and it was a UN safe area that was allowed to be slaughtered. Okay, now imagine myself walking from the ICTY building to, let's say, like 2 kilometers. I don't know what the distance is exactly, 5 kilometers, taking a tram, and then, you know, walking into another court building in which I started the case against the Netherlands. And I'm in the Netherlands. I'm in the capital of international justice. 3 major courts for this world, you know, ruling most sensitive cases in this world are sitting in that capital. And I'm struggling to get the words of truth out of the mouths of the people who did what they did. And I'm trying to, you know, imagine myself in the courtroom, in that Dutch court, where the only non-Dutch person is myself. The only non-Dutch person was myself.
So, Hasan, from what you said, how much this term, which is coined in academia, means politics of recognition for you who survived these atrocities and now have to fight for the truth and justice for those dear ones you lost. What for you would represent policy of recognition by courts or by governments or by your own governments? And after 25 years now going into and facing commemoration of Srebrenica genocide, how would you rate successes of recognition what really happened in Srebrenica politically, but also personally, legally, and emotionally?
I met a number of Serb individuals who say they understand what happened. There are people such as Sonja Biserko, who, in my opinion, really takes a lot of risk. You know, it takes a lot of courage, you know, to be Sonja Biserko, sit in Belgrade, you know, and write all these, you know, statements and make all these public statements about the role of Serbia, for example, in the Balkan Wars, the Yugoslav Wars. But there are individuals like her. There are ordinary people who I met who say they know what happened. They understand what happened. And so that there is some recognition, but the mainstream, I mean, the mainstream media in Republika Srpska and Serbia, you know, they keep on denying the basic facts. And of course, you know, Bosniaks appreciate, you know, the historical role of the ICTY, and Bosnians, I think, too. In general, they do appreciate what the ICTY has done, and this is such a tremendous achievement. What the ICTY has done, no one else would have been able to do that. And the problem is now when you watch a TV, let's say TV from Republika Srpska or TV from Serbia, you know, some talk show, where almost every individual, for example, involved in the discussion, would say that the ICTY is a political court which has been, you know, set up by some, you know, strong lobbies, you know, with the aim to demonize the Serbs. This is literally what the you know, participants in those discussions and those talk shows are saying, including high-ranking politicians from Serbia or Republika Srpska. But this is an anti-Serb court. This is a very dangerous message because, you know, I expected that you know, we have to draw the red line. You know, we have to draw the red line, and that we should say in this region that the narrative which we all have to accept, all of us, no matter how difficult it is for you personally to disagree, to agree with it, the bottom line should be that the ICTY narrative is, you know, the minimum that we should all agree about. But what happens now is that the ICTY narrative, as I said, is being simply, you know, disqualified as relevant, you know, by the mainstream media in Republika Srpska and Serbia, and politicians themselves, and every public figure from Republika Srpska and Serbia keeps saying that, like, almost every day.
Thank you, Hasan. I think it's a very nice moment to thank you for this. We will have discussion because it's exactly the topic that Edina Bečirević is going to present to us. Yeah. So I would like all of you to raise your virtual hands, and Hasan will answer your questions now. Holly, yes.
I just wanted to ask whether, so you were saying that the narrative generally in Serbia is to deny it, but are there people who are Serbian and who are trying to fight it? And if so, how are they dealt with in the community?
How are they what? Excuse me, can you say that again?
How are they treated if they do? Well, firstly, are there any people who try and fight the narrative of denial from within Serbia who are Serbian, and if so, how are they treated?
Yeah, I think I already mentioned the name of Sonja Biserko, and of course there is Nataša Kandić. There are whole organizations around individuals like this, and there are other individuals who are fighting that sort of, you know, counter narrative. They are fighting against the denial, but they are, in my opinion, they are in minority. You know, they are in minority, and we see a problem there, and you know, it is not only about the past. The problem is that actually is the main problem. What I personally think, and what I think the other people around me think, is that if we have a genocide verdict, you know, a verdict for genocide that says that there was a genocide against Bosnian Muslims as an ethnic group. Actually, it says genocide perpetrated against the Muslims of Bosnia and Herzegovina. This is what both the ICJ verdict and some ICTY verdicts, how they actually have defined it in terms of the wording. And so, you know, I would expect that the minimum of a benefit of such a, you know, such a historical judgment would be that the survivors and the next generation, their kids or even their grandchildren, live without fear of another genocide being perpetrated in the foreseeable future. I'm not sure if we can say that currently in 2020 in this region. Maybe these are all just, you know, political games where, you know, part of political election campaigns where both the politicians in Republika Srpska and those in Serbia use this sort of narrative to get votes. But, you know, it doesn't stop when they win. You know, if it stopped, if this sort of denial stopped when they win the term, I would say, okay, it's just you know, politics. But it doesn't stop. It goes on all the time, and I think it has much more to do with you know, the self-image. With the self-image, I think Serbia has been trying by all means to improve the self-image, and I think this is one of their main strategic projects, you know, that has been implemented for years now, and that they're going to do in the future.
It's quite ironic.
Yeah.
Do you want to continue, Holly, or because Anessa wanted to ask a question? But yeah, Anessa, it's your turn. Anessa comes from Kosovo.
Yes, I'm here. So my question is, if I understood well, please correct me. You mentioned that there is this going on initiative by media to not disqualify but diminish the importance of the ICTY. Now, from the whole perspective that you had over there in Bosnia, was really ICTY on the side all the time of the people, or of the people who have been sort of persecuted? So why is this tendency to diminish on media, to diminish the importance on ICTY when there was actually not a fair and equal prosecution, I would say?
Yeah, I mean, this is my interpretation, my understanding of the situation. You know, the attempts to diminish the role of the ICTY, they come from the mainstream media and, you know, political establishment of Republika Srpska in Serbia. Including also the Bosnian Croat political establishment and Croatian political establishment as well, to some extent, which is another complicated story. And it sees that the only ethnic group in this region that has not tried to really, by any means, diminish the role of the ICTY were the Bosniaks themselves. That is my understanding of the situation in the region. And I don't know if this answers your question, yes.
So, Francesca has a question. Thank you so much, Hasan. And Anissa, we are going to talk obviously about these issues in a different format. So I think for the start, it really sets out a good grounds for building up from here. So Francesca, please, your question.
Yes, I was wondering, because I feel like there within the Netherlands, these different narratives, like on the one hand, what you said, that the state defended or said it never happened. But then you also have a lot of, the Minister of Defense who spoke out against it, or soldiers from Dutchbat who said how traumatized they were. And isn't this in the Dutch public, or even doesn't it become clear that when we have these different views of it, that there's something not true?
Yeah, I agree with you. So as Emir said like an hour ago, that he was referring to the location near to his office at the Memorial Center. There's a road where he met with Mladić 25 years ago, and he said he saw what happened with his eyes. And of course, Mladić saw the same thing. So there's only one, that there should be only one version of the truth, right? And so basically, I think the court should not be the only place where we actually seek the truth, and it should not be the only type of an institution that should deliver this judicial truth. Even the judicial truth is sometimes different from what the people who experience these events think about it. So judicial truth is the closest that we can get to the absolute truth, which of course we can never get to. But the judicial truth is something that unfortunately we have to resort to, and we still have to resort to when seeking the truth. And unfortunately, again, it should not be the only place where the truth should be established, but it is such a hard, difficult, topic that it seems the court is the only place for it.
Thank you. Aidan here. Aidan is Professor of International Relations at Westminster University in London. Aidan, am I misrepresenting you again?
Oh, that's fine. Thank you, Nena.
No, so go ahead.
Thanks. Yeah, really interesting to hear you, Hasan. I went to the Memorial Center in Srebrenica last year, and obviously read about your work, and it was very, very affecting experience, and obviously I support everything that you're doing. And it's very disappointing to hear what you said about a number of the ways in which the international community has responded to your story and the story of the thousands of other people who were affected by what happened at Srebrenica. But when you mentioned about the rhetoric from the politicians in Republic Srpska and within Serbia, I also thought about when you were describing how the Netherlands has responded to this in the public understanding of this. When the Dutch government resigned en masse, that's the thing people remember. They don't really remember this refusal to acknowledge genocide. And I, to be honest,
that's a very good point. That's a very good point. It was, in my opinion, it was really a significant decision, significant event. I mean, it echoed throughout the world. For example, what the world did not know. It was 2002 in the springtime, and it was after the NIOD report has been already released. The NIOD report was, compiled by a group of investigators, researchers on behalf of that NIOD organization, this institute in the Netherlands. for War research, and it was presented on the report was presented on 4,000 pages, 4,000 pages long report. Several weeks later, the Dutch government resigned. But what the world did not know was that that was 2 weeks before the end of their term, for example. They never said that when they resigned, for example, you see. And then what have they lost? I mean, what has the government, they gained much more than they have lost. This was a political move that somebody came up with as an idea. It was an attempt to appear morally right, you see. But after they resigned, I went to the Netherlands again, and I said like this, okay, when we speak of responsibility, there are, in my vision, 3 different types of responsibility. There's a moral responsibility. There is a political responsibility, and what you did with this, government's resigning, you have taken the political responsibility. But there's also a legal responsibility. And that is the top level in my vision, where actually you set the score. You can't really set the score through this sort of political maneuvers. These are political maneuvers. And when you do political maneuvers, you don't stay between these in this sort of tunnel, or boundaries. There has to be boundaries that control what's going on. It is only in the legal process that the boundaries are clearly set, where you have to move between left and right, and you can't go outside of the box. And that's why I emphasize always that eventually, moral responsibility. When you take moral responsibility, there is no consequences. When you take political responsibility, there may be some consequences, but in terms of legal responsibility, there are very concrete, legal consequences, and then that remains on record. That's the point.
Thank you so much. We are Aidan. We are having now Nathan, and after Nathan, Adam, and then I'm very, very sorry we will have to come to a closure of this fascinating 1 hour. Nathan, please.
Thank you. Thank you for talking to us today. And just something that kind of sort of struck me throughout most of both this morning is that I think it was the idea that, Nena, you brought up about that the war never ends and that violence never ends, and that the reality, I think, that it seems to, from us anyway, from an outside perspective, for people like yourself, Hasan, and many other people in Bosnia, is that there is not only you having to live with this sort of day-to-day denial by individuals and states and refusal to acknowledge their role, but also, like you said, having to work alongside sometimes or in the same building of people who were lower down that pyramid of perpetrators. And I was just wondering, like, how you feel, what you would want to get from the process in order to be able to have some sort of closure or moving on, and what is it, because there's potentially hundreds or thousands of people still in Bosnia today who were involved in the genocide that may never be able to be held accountable. So how do you move on from that?
I mean, the question about closure has been asked countless of times. Emir said he didn't like that notion of closure at all, and it's really a difficult thing to define. I think I defined the problem of bringing this notion of closure in the past so many times, but I'm trying to recall some of the examples, and I say sometimes, okay, when does the genocide stop? There's 7, 8, 9 phases defined by Gregory Stanton. And according to the ICTY judgment and the ICJ judgment on the Srebrenica genocide, it the intent was conceived. Imagine now, you know, this is one of those problems with the judicial narrative. You know, the intent was conceived on or about 11 July, something like that, or 13 July. So, you know, the intent was conceived at one particular moment on a particular day, and they probably came up with an hour. I mean, that is absolutely, you know, that doesn't make sense at all. So Gregory Stanton says there are so many phases from, you know, polarization, from dehumanization, etc. And denial is the last phase in that, you know, set of phases that he has come up with as a scholar, as a genocide scholar. You've probably heard of Gregory Stanton and people around him. And so, first of all, you know, anybody thinking logically would say that it is impossible for genocide, for these phases of genocide to all happen at once within that short time period, which is, as the judgment says, from 13 July until 19 July, when all these people were killed. All these people were killed within this time window of, I don't know, 6 days. And then what happens on 20th July? What happens on 20th July? Is genocide over on 20th July? Is genocide over in 96? Is it over in 2006, 2016? When does it stop? You know, sometimes I say, even if those who actually conceived genocidal intent wanted to stop it by applying the analogy from physics, which is all around us, there is inertia. There's something we call inertia. You know, sometimes processes unfold without us wanting them to unfold. They just continue unfolding. It's inertia. And you know.
Yeah, I completely, it's a fascinating way you describe it.
Yeah.
And if you can stay with us with when Edina presents her more academic.
I have like three.
I think she will talk about this as well. Yeah, go ahead, Hasan, sorry.
I have another three interviews today, Just to finish my thought, okay?
Okay.
This is from inside. This is the view from inside. I'm sitting in Sarajevo, and I belong to a nation of 2 million people, where many people think that genocide is not over, and there is a threat of another genocidal violence in a foreseeable future. Maybe it's not very likely to happen, and I hope it will not happen, and I think it will not happen, but there is a fear. There's a fear. When I go out to the Netherlands and when I look from there at Bosnia and the Balkans, what I see, you know, from that angle is, I don't know how many, 8 countries that were created out of one country where things are still messy and where things need to be resolved. And so I'm trying to look at it from 2 different angles and trying to understand how, I'll finish my thought here. We are still having serious problems in this region, and we simply cannot solve the problems without the help from the outside. This is one of the important points that we always need to remind the world about. We need assistance from the outside. We still need help from political political help from the outside. You know,
Thank you, Hasan. Before you leave us, Adam kindly gave up his question, and he's going to use it for Edina's session. So
yes.
Before I thank you very, very deeply for your time listening to Emir and having and telling us this compelling and important story, I have another closing remark and possibly your answer to this. I'm very much aware of these 5-year periods when everyone now is working on yet another anniversary of genocide in Srebrenica, and you all become subjects to interviews and this sort of public lectures.
Yeah.
How can we fill in the gap in between these 5 years? Because I have this opportunity to have courses at the university, so I'm grooming a new generation to have at least basic understanding of this. But how does this frenzy every 5 years make you feel? Do you feel as a passive object of someone's journalistic interest, or do you think we shouldn't be so cynical as I am maybe becoming? Oh, every 5 years there will be 2 days attention of Srebrenica and we will happily forget it for another 5 years. Tell me, how do you understand these dynamics of silence and then lots of information and then silence again? Am I misreading what it really means to have any commemoration and remembrance of such an important tragic event?
I mean, you can't have people discuss about genocide every single day in a year. You just can't do that. I mean, you can discuss genocide, of course, within this sort of academic, educational, settings, groups, and that topic should be discussed throughout the year, of course, and it should be a part of the curricula, definitely. I mean, one of our most important goals, I think, should be all of us together, is to have, as you already mentioned today, to have the Bosnian genocide officially, in the school books, in the textbooks, at schools, in the curricula. That is including those in Serbia, Belgrade, Croatia, and Bosnia, in the whole region.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much for your time.
Very small remark, just a very small comment. I remember when I was in high school, we also had this textbook for history. And I remember searching up information about the genocide, and there was only one small paragraph with a picture. And it said, this was the biggest genocide after World War II in Europe. That it said that with a little bit of information, and it just got a small paragraph, which was insane to imagine. That was
just for clarification, you went to a Dutch high school. That was in the Netherlands, and Dutch did not even bother to write it. Thank you so much, all of you, for your patience. Hasan, many thanks. We'll stay in touch, and we will organize this on-site conference in Potocari. Geoffrey is raising his hand.
No. I only to say goodbye to Hasan.
Okay,
Hasan, see you later in the year.
Stay in touch, and many thanks.